Nietzsche once said that if you can explain to people why they do things or why they should do something, that's like 3/4 of the battle. Those who know why tend to be able to cope through stormy waters more. And we live in a day and age where we're really blessed. Really are. It's an amazing time to be alive. We live longer. Most of us here have never been in a war. We have lots of food. In fact, we're quite literally, where's the handheld? Does anybody know? Yeah, I'm going to switch tape, okay. This mic has a mind of its own, so thanks, Tim. Excuse me while I digress, but we live in a society where we're quite honestly eating and drinking and sexing and indulging ourselves to death. Some of the leading causes of death in our culture are excess. And so things like obesity and all kinds of venereal diseases and drinking problems and drug problems and all that are really indicative of the fact that we not only have access to these things, but that we are somehow pushed to embrace them. We live in an interesting society. It's a society that says, let yourself go, do what you want, follow your heart, all those kind of things. And then as soon as you step over a certain line, they go, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You ever notice that about our society? You know, like, oh yeah, drink, a Friday night, get out, have a good time. But if you're charged for drunk driving, you're all of a sudden, oh, you're a horrible person, oh, you're this. And you're kind of like, you're getting two messages, right? And one of those messages is often about the idea of money. Money is a funny topic. I've learned early in my life that there are three things people tend to get really weird about. One is their kids or family. Two is tends to be religion. I've run into some hokey ideas. And the third one is money. I used to interact with people who didn't know me or anything about me, but because we were involved in a financial transaction, if you don't know, my background was accounting before I became a minister, people go from here to here about things. I used to deal with some people that worked here at the college who would give a $5 donation to something. And these were often people that were making over $100,000 a year 25 years ago, okay? And if they couldn't get a income tax receipt, even though an income tax receipt for $5 can't be used, they went ballistic. We had people writing letters and doing all kinds of things like that. And we'd say you have to give at least 20, it was 20 in those days, I think it's 25 today, in order to get an income tax receipt for that. And they would still battle it. It was just weird, and it's one of the areas that when we talk about it or when anybody talks to us about it, we get weird about it. I actually don't feel weird about talking about money for a couple of reasons. One is I've learned over the years that this is an area that if you bring it up with people and we teach godly principles about it, it's very liberating. It really is. It all of a sudden loses its hold over us because we make too big a deal in our society about money. It's like number 1 or 2 when it should be like number 13 or 15 as far as things that are important to us as people, just as people. So when I get a chance to take money down a peg, I'm always glad to do it because I find that when I'm worried about money, I'm pretty well miserable about everything else. 2 out of 3 marriages that come apart, the major thing they fight about is money. It sometimes has underlying causes like control and things like that, but money is the thing people really fight about too much. And so we're going to put money in its place a little bit today, and we're going to talk about it came from within, the monsters that live in our heart that we're going to drag into the light. And just like when you're a kid, if you're worried about a monster under your bed, we get a chance to drag them in the light and watch them shrivel up. So you ready for that? Yeah? You're really excited about this? You're so glad. Say, Scott, I'm glad you're talking about money. Yeah, see, you're getting excited. I like this. Diane, you won the coffee card. You're so sweet. I don't tell Diane this often enough, but she's one of my favorites. All right, so we're doing an invasion of the money snatchers. Jesus said, things that come out of the mouth come from the heart. And so often the things we say or we get excited about are things that are indicative of our heart condition. We talked about, actually week 2 we talked about guilt, but we talked about guilt, which means I owe you. We We talked about anger, you owe me, and we talked about this is greed, I owe me. Greed is the lie that we tell ourselves in order to indulge that if I spend this, or if I have this, or if I go this way, or if I indulge in this, it's going to provide things that are needed deep in my soul. And you know what? I can't say I blame you. I'm an incredibly materialistic person. Around Christmas, I am completely irrational. I love presents. You know, some people say they love the carols, they love the smile on everybody's face. I'm all about the presents. Every year, I buy myself Christmas presents on top of the ones I'm getting from my family. In fact, I buy myself early Christmas presents so I can open them before Christmas, even though I know exactly what they are, and I wrap them because I'm so excited about Christmas. I am incredibly materialistic, okay? So I love stuff. Value Village is Hollywood for me, okay? All right? So, this is something I need to hear as well as you. So, as we indulge in this, think about the irony of it, though. 30 years ago, you never would have seen a store like Value Village. And why do we have Value Villages? We have Value Villages because we've accumulated so much, we have so much stuff, that we actually have to give it away, and someone is making money reselling the junk that we can't use in order to somehow keep the flow of stuff going. So, you got to think for those good capitalist company owners, we made money on this toaster the first time, and then we're making money on this toaster again, right? Like it gets sold 2 or 3 times, and that's an exciting thing. A lot of people would say, hey, I'm not a greedy person, all right? And I'm one of those people who would say that. Greed it's a little harder to distinguish because, than anger or guilt, because it camouflages itself as a virtue. I'm not greedy, I'm frugal. Or I'm not cheap, I'm conscientious, right? And there's a half-truth in there. You want to manage your money well. The scriptures are wide open about, and over and over and over again in the Old Testament and the New Testament, the management of money is an actual direction to order and understanding. I'm also not against saving. I save myself, and I think saving is a big important thing, especially if you're ever planning to retire. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and they said they're in the Freedom 85, and you know what I mean. They just I'll just keep working because there's no way I can retire on this, right? So I guess the question I have to ask myself when it comes to money is, I say, do I put the same creative energy into giving as I do spending? That's an interesting question, right? Do I put the same creative energy into giving as I do spending? And if you're like me, a lot of us would have to say, no, not really. The idea of giving something away, or giving money or things away, or giving my time or my talents, tends to be, oh, I guess I can do that. Or I guess I'll write a check for that. But when we get up in the morning, a lot of times, like myself, we think, what can I get today? What can I add today? What can I, put in my collection? What can I do? Tony Campolo, he's getting a little long in the tooth, but he still has great quotes. He said, nowhere do you see in the scripture that your specific theological beliefs are going to make a difference when you stand before God. But in many places, we see how we treat the poor and disadvantaged is taken into account. And it's not that theology isn't important. It's immensely important. But you often see in the scriptures where God is talking to his people that when we get to the end of this life, one of the things that's going to be so primary is going to be, what did you do with the material gifts I gave you? And you think, what is a God of the universe, is vaster than all the planets and everything? What does he care about, giving? It's not that God needs our money. It's not. It's not that God needs our thing. It's that in order to love God, we have to put our things and our money in their place. We have to prioritize them a certain way. Why? Because money is one of the major things that will keep you from God. It acts as a hindrance to so many people, money. It can demoralize you. It can, put you down. It can waste your time. It can do all kinds of things. And like I said, I'm all for hard work. I'm all for industriousness. I'm all for saving. I'm all for all those things. But here's the thing, is if the first thing you get up in the morning thinking about is money, it's in a place of priority that it should not be. Okay? And for many of us, that comes through, debt. A lot of times we spend more than we need or spend more than we should. And in fact, there's studies that show that Canadians right now are actually worse than Americans as far as, and this is kind of a first thing, only happened the last few years, but we actually have more debt per person now, and this is often modeled by our governments who spend far more than they bring in order to push, our troubles down the road. Today we're going to borrow, who cares about tomorrow? Well, if you've been through a couple of recessions, as I have, you realize tomorrow's very important, how you operate today. Because eventually, like I said, you get to the end of your tether, and then you go over that line, and then everybody shakes their finger at you, tisk, tisk. You shouldn't have done that. When you've been bombarded with, give us this, buy this, if you don't have this, it's just a crazy thing. So I want to talk a little bit about today. I'm going to read you through some scriptures that are self-explanatory. This is Jesus' approach to wealth, okay? And how he wants us to approach life. Now, I want you to note a couple things. One, Jesus is talking to people that we would consider below the poverty line. Okay? So these are people that in today's world will be living on less than an American dollar a day. Most of them. There was this huge chasm between rich and poor in the Jewish nation at this time. The Romans occupied. There were a few Jewish leaders that had a lot of power. The Romans had this arrangement with them. We'll give you power and let you fleece the people as much as you want, as long as you collect their taxes and you keep them subdued. Why did they kill Jesus? Because he taught things that contradicted or attacked their power structure. And because of that, he talked about the things of the kingdom that affected how people lived in this world. And because of that, he was a major threat, politically, morally, in every way. So there's a scripture in Luke 12, and I'm going to read a couple as we just walk through this, and we'll have a couple of minutes for questions. Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me as a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to him, "Watch out. Be on your guard about all kinds of greed. A man does not live or consist on the abundance of his possessions." Here's an interesting, I look at this, how he says this. A man or woman, life does not consist in the abundance of their possessions. Interesting. You think, well, I got to eat, right? Got to have a shelter over my head, especially if I live in Canada, because as much as everybody loves Mother Nature these days, 6 months of the year in Canada at least, she's trying to kill you, right? Really. No way you live in Canada if you don't have proper shelter. Well, shelter is expensive, especially in today's real estate market, right? You have to pay taxes to live here. That requires money. What does Jesus said? He said, the man's or woman's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. He's saying it's not the most important thing, folks. In fact, it's not even in the top 10. Let's talk about what they are. Okay, so we live in a culture that's constantly trying to upgrade or accumulate things. And like I said, sometimes I hear sermons about money and you leave. You feel like you've been beat about the head and stuff like this. I want to encourage you to be a cheerful giver and a cheerful contributor and handle your money in a cheerful way. Why? Because we want liberty, not bondage. Okay? But we think if we upgrade, we'll have all these things. The first thing we think, or the first challenge to it, is that it doesn't last. Buying new things doesn't last, especially in a consumer society. I don't know if you, last year we got a new stove and a new fridge. And the stove we had before that was one we inherited from the Louks that they got near when you began around, I think it was the 60s or 70s or something like that. Well, this thing was built like a tank. It was like cast, steel or whatever, and it just went and went and went. And every once in a while, the burner would go in the oven, and I'd go up to Home Depot and pay $17 and get another one, plug it in, and away it went. It was a wonderful stove. But it wasn't very energy efficient, so we thought, okay, well, let's get a new one. So we're buying these appliances, and this thing had lived for 35, 40 years, 50 actually, years. And I said, how long do these puppies last? I was thinking 20, 25 years. She said, well, if you get 7 or 8 years out of them, that's good, right? All of a sudden that upgrade doesn't look like such a good investment, right? It doesn't last. It doesn't lead to contentment. I love the thrill of buying something new. Makes me very happy. But the problem is my closet is stuffed full of things that brought me great joy for about an hour that I don't even remember I bought, right? And probably yours is too. It doesn't help you like yourself better because it's not how you were designed. We're not meant to be self-serving. So it doesn't help us like ourselves better, you know? Yeah, we think if I buy things, it's going to inflate my self-esteem. Here's the thing. Does that mean when I can't buy something, I should have bad self-esteem? You know, that's failed logic, isn't it? I'm all for rewarding myself, especially with chocolate or coffee. But what is to be said for me that I need somehow to pamper myself to feel important when God has chosen me, has died for me, has picked me to be his child, has promised heaven to me, and actually has the audacity to reward me for things I should have done in the first place? I can feel pretty good about that. Well, you say, Scott, we're unworthy. Yeah, Jesus makes us worthy, but that doesn't mean we're worthless. In fact, we are incredibly worth a lot because God went to such an extent to say, I love you, I'm making a way for you, and hang on, baby, we're going to spend eternity together, right? He says a lot of that. That's a pretty good thing to get up in the morning and say, wow, I'm a child of God. He loves me, cares about me, has planned for me. You know, that's a lot of good stuff. How am I hurting those around me? Well, this is the sad part of greed. It's often you damage the people around you of your desire to protect and accumulate your stuff. It's easy for us to prioritize stuff over someone's feelings. And this is true. My wife and I were talking about something, and one thing I do once in a while, which I don't enjoy very much, but I do them, is funerals, right? And funerals are interesting things when you have a family that is fighting over the inheritance. I have seen people that are not on speaking terms with their relatives, brothers, sisters, people they grew up with for years and years and years because he stole the coffee table when it should have been mine, right? And you wouldn't believe it. People become, you think you own your stuff? About 5 minutes after you're gone, trust me, they're going to be dividing it up and placing stakes, okay? We don't really own anything, right? But there's people who destroy relationships over stuff, you know? And I remember, like when my dad passed away, I really wanted his Bible. But my dad had a special friend, and my mom thought it was important that that person have this Bible. And I remember walking around for a year just really frustrated about that. I wanted his Bible, I wanted his Bible, I wanted his Bible. And I think back, I think, why did I want his Bible? It's King James. I don't even preach from that translation, right? You know, but it was a thing, you know, I kind of fixated on. Well, you know, it's not like I can't find another Bible. You know what I mean? So it's a crazy thing. We tend to put ourselves first, too. Tends to be when I'm about spending on myself. I am about myself, and I tend to prioritize myself over people maybe I shouldn't. You know, I've met people that they have kids, and they're like, wow, these are expensive. Can't go out anymore. Can't buy stuff anymore. The last time I got a new sweater. Little critter keeps growing so fast. I got to get a new shoes every 6 months, you know, and all that, and they resent their kids. You don't think your kids pick up on that? You know? Kids giving, you know, new life and bringing up a child and, you know, loving on them. And that's a calling, you know? But I've met people who resent it. When I'm thinking, you know, that little bologna loaf is the one thing that's going to go on after you're gone that is going to matter to you. All right? So maybe you should take some time with those little screamers and go, yeah, I've got to put this person ahead of myself. We fail to realize and empathize with those around us. It's true. You know, when I focus in on myself and I'm always about my own things, I tend to cloud over the needs of other people. So I tend to look at people that really need help and think, well, they should have done better, shouldn't they? You know, I don't know if you've ever been in a plane. This is a great Seinfeld joke, but, you know, and they have first class up at the front, and they have the curtain. You ever notice this, what do they call them, airline assistants or flight attendants? Yeah, you know, when they're closing the curtain, you know, they're kind of like, you should have done better. kind of thing, because you're not in first class, right? If you just worked a little harder, you could be up here too, kind of thing. There's 8 people up there, and they have their own bathroom, and in the back where there's 270, they have like half a bathroom, kind of thing. Like, it's funny how our world looks, but that's we fail to empathize with those around us. And it actually creates a failure to connect with others, a void. Because when I'm trying to fill my heart with material things, I really have a hard time loving people. And so I've got a passage I'm going to read us through, and then I'll just quickly go through that, and then we'll move on. Jesus said to his followers, "Don't store up treasures here on earth, where moth eats and rust destroys them, where thieves break in and steal. Store treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there your desires of your heart will also lie." We've been talking a lot about the heart here. "Your eye is a lamp that provides light for your body. When your eye is good, your whole body is filled with light. But when your eye is bad, your whole body is filled with darkness. And the light you think you have is actually darkness." How deep that darkness is. "No one can serve 2 masters, for you'll hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." It's not that money is evil. It's that if it's number one in our life, we start hating God and we start disobeying Him. Because when money is number one in your life, you are number one. And when I'm number one, the failure to launch as far as loving other people is hindered greatly, and the failure to submit to a great, gracious, wonderful God is hindered. When I put money before God, money is my God. If you put money before God, money becomes your God. Jesus went on to say, "And that's why I tell you not to worry about everyday life, whether you have enough food or drink or enough clothes to wear. Isn't life more than food, and your body more than clothing? Look at the birds. They don't plant or harvest or store food in barns, for your heavenly Father feeds them. And aren't you far more valuable to Him than they are? Can all your worries add a single moment to your life? And why worry about clothing? Look at the lilies of the field and how they grow. That doesn't work. They don't work or make their clothing. Yet Solomon in all his glory was not dressed as beautifully as they are. And if God cares so wonderfully about wildflowers that are here today and thrown into the fire tomorrow, He will certainly care for you. Why do you have so little faith?" So I want to focus on this, just this one verse. If your eye is good, then everything else is going to follow. It follows through to the heart. The word "good" there is not used a lot in the New Testament. It's kind of a word play. But the word for "good" there is a word that means simple, clean, orderly. It's a word of priorities. If your eye is good, and goodness in the sense of how do I put it? A picture of orderliness, okay? But then when he goes on to say, and if your eye is bad, the concept of it is chaos. It's an ever-changing situation that is constantly rolling you about. Jesus said when we approach money, we should have a very simple, clean, really transparent way of looking at money and how we handle it. It means generous, but it also means orderly and simple. If we have generous eyes, or do we have envious eyes? And next week I talk about jealousy a little bit. And Jesus talked about, I've read this passage, so I'm just going to pass on to the next slide. So how do I overcome greed? The solution to greed is giving. It really is. If you want to put money in its place, then sharing what God has given you. Because here's the thing. How much of my money belongs to me if I'm a follower of Jesus Christ? None of it, right? But how much does God allow me to use? Most of it. So if God in His priorities and things like that recognizes that, the solution to the concept of greed are constantly feeding this desire in myself to feel better about myself, to put myself ahead, to somehow attain something that God gives me for free, then the solution to it is the freedom of being able to release what God has given you materially. And these are the priorities. We want to look at that simple, good, gracious, generous way of looking at life. Give first. We often give what's last, right? Junk for Jesus. Or we give, stuff to Value Village. You're helping our charities, they say, right? And it's good that they're honoring charities and stuff like that. Heck, you can go to the casino and blow lots of money that goes to charity there too. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a healthy, indicative, good way of life, right? So it is kind of neat, but here's the thing. God's call on us is always to give first. And consistently in the Old Testament, when people brought something to the Lord or brought something to the temple, the idea is you give your first and your best. And so every paycheck, every month, my wife and I calculate, and 10% of what we make is given back to God. We give other things too, and we're able to give other things. And that orderly way of life, that kind of clean, simple, driven way of looking at things creates all kinds of benefits in other ways because God takes the other 90% and he creates something beautiful of us. Give first, give a percentage, and then create margin for more. Because giving is not just about 10%, it's about a way of life. How many things do I have kicking around my house that would be a blessing to someone else? Well, I'm a hoarder. I really am. What would happen if I gave this to this person or I gave this to that person? What would happen, if I give my 10% to God, but I also adopt a child in a developing world, The actual decline of poverty internationally right now is the worst or best kept secret that it really shouldn't be, is what's happening internationally right now. Poverty is shrinking. There's all kinds of people, millions of people being lifted out of poverty every year. Why? Because we're coming up with vaccines, where the internet has made education possible. There's all these kind of things. It's been absolutely wonderful. And what a great opportunity is to adopt a child in a developing world, through World Vision or something like that. Tony Campolo jokes that when you stand before God one day, it's probably a good idea to have one of those little kids beside you. That's a great visual. And then apply your creative energy to cause. Liquidate, Sometimes, I remember this one guy preached a sermon about greed, and the guy came up after me and he said, thank you, I have 3 jobs because I'm always trying to accumulate stuff because we spend so much money. I'm going to quit one of my jobs this week. I got a little nervous when he said it, because I'm thinking, dear. But he actually did, and it was actually made a big difference in his family. I've had other people come up to me and say, you know what, we got a 3,500 square foot house, and there's only 2 of us in it. It seems a little excessive. What do you think? Maybe. I don't know. Depends what you use it for. But, if that's really convicting you, maybe God's talking to you about doing something, and they downsize. Other people have gone on a missions trip, and they've learned what people like in the developing world, and they've got a heart for it, There's all kinds of things to liquidate, reallocate. Maybe there's things that aren't being used very well that could be of use to somebody else. Now, before you all empty your libraries and bring it to the church, we only have room for so many books out there, okay? But there's nothing to stop you, from going, I read this book, probably never going to read it again. Is there someone I can pass this on to? Or is there someone who will benefit more from this? And reinvest. What has God given you that you can reinvest in the kingdom? Question: have you ever known a generous person who is not happy? Have you ever known a generous person who is not happy? I've met religious people who are grumpy, who give a lot, but I've never known a generous, open-handed person who was a total jerk. You know why? Because when you put money in its place down the priority scale and you honor God with your life, you are free. It's the chain breaker. And I grew up, in a family that didn't have a lot. And when I grew up, I thought, I got to have this, I got to have this, I got to accumulate this. It's something I always fight. Because I think if I have it, because I looked around in my street, I looked at the kids that had the right shoes, the right backpack, right, all those things. I think if I have it, I'm an important person. Not realizing that all the time I had Jesus Christ, and that made me the luckiest person in the world. All right? that's all I got to say about that. We got a couple minutes for questions. We're going to ask the baskets to go around, and we'll take a few questions, and then we'll go into our quote show. But the baskets, there's outies and innies. The outies are the ones you take stuff out of. The innies are the ones you put stuff in. Hey, great crowd today. It's nice to see you all. Nice to see some of you. You know, I haven't seen you in a week or two, and some of you, first time here. We're really glad you're here. Was there enough new people packets out there, Selena? No, there wasn't? We'll get you a present. Really? Yes, Scotty. Oh, yeah, Grace.
Your comment about what was the generous thing that you said our society is really rich in? You made that comment a few minutes ago. Anyway, I was reading this National Post weekend thing that I brought for you, and it's talking about how there are so many people who feel lonely in Britain that they've appointed a minister of loneliness.
Wow.
And it's just the opposite of, I can't remember exactly what you said. There's no poverty, you were saying, about financial, you have enough money to buy what you need sort of thing.
Yeah.
But it seems like that whole story is a little different in regards to what I just said. And I think there's a lot of people who are lonely out there, not just in Britain.
Yeah. That's great, Grace. In Britain, the statistics show, and this is 4-year-old statistics, but for the first time ever, people under the age of 26 are more lonely than seniors. Generally, your most lonely population are seniors who have lost their spouses. But if you look at England right now, the loneliest people are under the age of 26, when most of us would think you're socially interacting the most. Jeremy?
I just want to know what the difference between stewardship and giving, because I remember with my YWAM team years ago, I was the kind of person that would always like to spend money on our outreach, like crazy.
Yeah.
And my leaders came up to me and said, you have to be good stewards of your money.
Yeah.
And if you spend too much, God's not going to bless it.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, is there any teaching you or any idea what we can do for good stewardship?
I've always looked at stewardship as kind of a whole life thing. So when I say stewardship, I think of my time, my resources, and my talents. Okay? So some of you swing a hammer incredibly well. Okay? You can do it without hitting digits. Okay? And some of you, know how to do plumbing, or, some of you know how to make an atomic bomb. There's all kinds of really valuable information in this room, right? And that's something you're a steward of. God has entrusted you with that ability. And so the question is, how can you honor God with that ability? I remember a guy in a congregation I grew up with was a mechanic, and he had a special ministry to single moms. And because single moms often, in those days especially, when they went to the garage, they got preyed upon because they didn't have a lot of mechanical know-how in those days. Women tend to be able to take a car apart and put it back together these days. But in those days, they were taking advantage a lot. So he would actually go and he would, for the price of parts, would fix their car. I thought, what a great ministry. There's all kinds of gifts. The guys here who pull the trailer, oh my gosh, what a great gift. They bring their trucks, they back them in, they sludge through the mud and the slush and the frozen locks and all that kind of stuff to bring all the wonderful things that we use here to church every Sunday. You never see those guys prayed in front of anybody or whatever. They're just happy to do what they do, and they honor God with it. So stewardship is everything. It's time, giving your time to someone, stopping and saying hi to someone, and then money. It's a stewardship of our money. So giving, I look at, you can be a steward of all those things and give, but I just see stewardship as, okay, my life's not my own, my talents, my resources, my time are not my own. How can I honor God with them today? Yeah. Hey, Michael. Hey. How you doing, buddy?
Just as a comment on what you were just saying, there's a big break between holding onto your money too tightly,
yes,
and not being willing to be generous,
yes,
and then being wise with how you're generous.
yes, yeah,
and they're two completely different problems that you have to solve separately.
yes,
One is, I have all this money and I don't want to give it up because I'm afraid of my own security.
yeah,
And so then you're not helping anyone.
yeah,
and the other is you're throwing all your money into the mud and none of it's going anywhere useful.
Yeah.
And sure, you didn't value it, and God's glad that you're not serving money, but
Yeah.
you could have done something useful with it and you didn't.
Yeah, yeah. I remember a time, this dates me a bit, but in the 1980s, enormous amount of people's charitable giving went south to the border to televangelists. And then all the scandals happened. All of a sudden we saw that many of these people, not all of them, and some of them were good guys, but many of them were living double lives. I can't tell you the positive impact that had in the local church in Canada when that kind of giving got transferred from sending it to Reverend Hillbilly or whoever to the local church. All of a sudden, small groups could happen. Churches could staff appropriately. There's all kinds of amazing things. Missions giving went up. Why? Because people were giving wisely in most cases. There were some local churches, there were some nightmare stories too. But as a general rule, they were giving wisely. John said in 1 John, he said, God is love. And how do we know that God lives in us? Is that we love our brothers and sisters. When you give to your church, or you give to the church internationally or missions or any of those things, what you're doing is you're taking the person next to you and you're saying, I am loving you. Because a lot of people don't know this, but if you look, every seat in this room, every one of you, to have church for a year costs $2,500. That's what it costs to have church. And we are like one of the budget lightest churches there is. We don't own a building, we just rent this room. But each person here to minister to costs about $2,500 a year. And so the question is, how can I love my brothers and sisters? When you contribute your tithes and offerings, you're basically saying to the people in this room, you are my family. I'm watching out for you. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. And you're probably sitting there and going, I don't give anything. How are we surviving? We're surviving because some people give far beyond $2,500 a head. They really do. And you know what? I love them for doing it. It's great, all those kind of things. But I have a responsibility to give and contribute as well. Because you know what? You're worth it. You really are. We all are. Anybody else? One more. Hi, Doug.
So first of all, for those of you burning with curiosity, the answer was Ranger Smith. Too easy, too easy.
You know what? I was just sitting there the whole sermon worrying about that.
Second thing is I forgot to mention, when I was at the Promise Keeper meeting, I picked up a bunch of magazines
Yes.
from Promise Keeper. They publish a great magazine called Seven.
Yes.
Lots of articles that just are for guys who, and things that just connect us to our faith and
Yeah.
give us encouragement. So they're free, just
Yeah.
pick them up. I hope to find them gone because I've got too much junk at home and I don't want to have to take them home.
Yeah.
I already have copies of those magazines.
Yeah.
The other thing is just to more or less just reinforce what you've said from a practical standpoint. So as many of you know, before I retired, I was a financial planner and investment advisor. I spent many, many years working with people. All of my clients had money, otherwise they wouldn't have been my clients.
Yeah.
The reason they had saved money was in many cases because they didn't work for the government and they didn't have a government guaranteed indexed pension.
Yeah.
So because of that, they had to save some money and they were somewhat reliant on their savings. Having to save money and having to be reliant on your savings can tend to make you insecure about money. Our goal as financial planners was to give people peace of mind about their money, to feel like they knew when they'd saved enough to know that they were getting good advice and so on. And we were trying to help people with that. And I had clients that had a lot of money, and I had clients that had modest amounts of money. But the biggest thing that I saw in terms of clients having peace of mind about their money and their savings was how generous they were.
Yeah.
If they were, and we could see that as well because we often looked at clients and we looked at their taxes and so on, and we'd see whether they gave money, because obviously when you give money, you often get a tax deduction. Many clients were very wealthy,
Yeah.
had lots of money, more than they would ever spend or need, and never gave anything.
Yeah.
Those clients had no peace of mind regardless of how much they had. Others had modest amounts.
Yeah.
You could see that they were generous. They were generous with their family. They were generous with giving to their church or wherever else they were a part of.
Yeah.
And you could tell from your interactions with them in the ups and downs of the markets and so on that they had a lot more peace of mind. So to me, that was a great testimony that I learned through my business
Yes.
of just how true it is that giving is the antidote to greed and the insecurity that comes from being overly materialistic.
Yeah. That's good, wise words, Dougie. Thank you. Thank you. So, what's the challenge? Is if you don't contribute to the kingdom of God and you aren't supporting anyone in poverty or anything like that, make today the first day you start. Write a check. Give a mid amount. And then set out that from this point forward, every week, to honor God with what you have, or every month, support someone, international way, or every week, pick up your food and things to donate and all those kind of things. You know what I'd love to see happen at Kawartha Community Church? Is that every week when I say, we're about to pass the baskets, to have applause break out. Because God loves a cheerful giver, okay? And I want to let you know something. Yeah, it's good. I want to let you know something. Part of the pastor role, often, is to make the congregation aware when we need money or, those kind of things. I do it very rarely here. You know why? Because there's all kinds of people that don't know Jesus. And when they come here, one of the benefits that I think is wonderful is we don't have to browbeat about money. And we don't have these overwhelming needs. We stay in the black. We honor God with what we have. Like I said, we've given money away to missions this year. God has been good. And when you are faithful in your giving, and when you set out to do so, it enables us in leadership to put money about level 12 or 13 and focus on issues of the heart and all that. But I want you to know that we will still and always talk about money, whether we are doing well or not well. Why? Because if you want to stand before Jesus and get welcomed in his kingdom, let the thing that's not going to get you into heaven not be money. Okay? Don't allow greed to rob you of eternity because you are under the impression that the urgent is more important than the important. Okay? And just to say that, Jesus' challenge to all his disciples first was a material one. Leave your nets and your boats. Come and follow me. It was a material one. They were turning their back on things that offered security and money and support and following Jesus. His challenge to us is the same. So, I'm going to have the worship team coming up. We've gone late today because we had the soup thing, okay, a little bit. But if you have children, don't bother? No, okay, all right. You're fired, apparently. Okay, okay. All right, I'm going to close in a second. What I'd like to do is, in closing, ask that you just this week, if you brought soup, make sure you bring your containers home and things like that. I don't want to go home with 4 crock pots, all right? If you have a chance and there's a little bit of soup left out there and you like cold soup, help. And good. So as you go, I'm going to pray, and we have a video just going with some quotes and stuff. You can stay and watch it, or you can go. But thank you for being here. Next week, we wind up the series, It Came From Within, and we're going to talk about jealousy. Oh, that was good, wasn't it? That was a good laugh. Yeah, really. You may think, I'm not a jealous person. Yeah, but sometimes it's good to talk about these things just in case it crops up, okay? So next week, come for sure, just in case, right? That you are racked with jealousy, because we're going to drag these monsters into the light, and they're going to shrivel in the power of God's power. Or revelation or whatever. I'm babbling. Sorry, the coffee has kicked in. So, as you go, God bless you. Father, thank you for everyone here, and I pray that God, you'd be with them, that you would give them strength as they go. And Lord, as we overcome these things, make our hearts pure. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you. We'll see you next week.